So I'm kind of fascinated with this idea of edging, which is, as you know, the practice of kind of getting stimulated to the point just before orgasm and then kind of holding off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like you're delaying the orgasm itself, delaying kind of the end. Um, and yeah, I'm really curious. I actually wish I could go around and sort of do an interview with a whole bunch of people and say, what comes up for you? What
Yeah.
comes up for you when you do this, when you let go of like the final thing? Like what actually happens? I mean, because I'm thinking of it in terms of like, I mean, the beautiful aspect of it is to this idea of actually just being in having sex itself, whether it's with yourself or with someone else. And it's not just like, oh, I'm gonna grab the vibrator and because I need an orgasm. You know,
Mm.
it's like, how do you actually, how am I gonna be with this person? Because I really just want to make them feel good and I want to spend time in this feeling good experience, you know. But
Yeah.
I think it's I guess it feels like a little bit of a maybe a queering of the idea of sex, you know, that there's not just A, B, and C.
Right. Right.
You know, there's I'm going to do this a little bit to get you warmed up, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to finish, and then I'm
Mhm.
going to get out, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Mm.
What are your thoughts around this, Nick?
A lot of thoughts. I mean, I do think like just to take a few moments when you're hearing this to think about like what edging brings up for you. Um, Certainly it brings up a lot, I think, for everybody and in different ways probably, but I think it can also apply more generally to just like energy in our bodies and even like emotions. It's like I think that we are sort of socialized to think of energy in our bodies as something that we need to like find release for.
Yeah.
And so it so often just goes down, even in therapy, it's like, oh, there's this energy coming up, and how do I find kind of like release of that pressure? And so edging is just this idea that um, it's not about the release, it's about like this sort of experiencing of that kind of like rising energy in your body, and for that to not be labeled as something that needs to be released, but something to just kind of enjoy. I think it's just like a good practice for all aspects of life to kind of like let go of the destination. And we say this so much in our practice. It's just like letting go of kind of the linear path and being with the present moment experiencing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I think about it in actuality, it's like I think what comes up for me, I mean, it's not a super relaxed experience, you know, and I think a lot of the rush to finish is to get to the relaxed part because after the release, there's like such a rush of whatever those whatever those chemicals are and they're relaxed. So it's like actually physically there is kind of almost like I wouldn't say a nervousness, but just a you know there's a yeah there's like a little bit of nervousness kind of built into the energy, right? Which is
Yeah.
kind of like pushing you forward. And it's
Yeah.
just it's so interesting because it's almost like pushing you forward like we gotta get this over with. But
Mhm.
but then you're like, wow, this is so great. Like, why am I rushing to
Mhm.
finish? You know, but
Yeah, yeah. And, in a male body, I feel like a lot of value gets attached to our ability to, stay hard and finish. A lot of our self-worth gets attached to that. And so the edging kind of like challenges that narrative. I think when we have that forward momentum, it's like if our value and our worth is tied up in that like act of finishing, then yeah, the concept of letting that go can challenge a lot of those internal narratives. I'm sure there's like different variations of this for female-bodied people,
yes.
but I do think that there's especially kind of a pressure for men around that like that finishing aspect. And so yeah, it can be difficult. It can be really difficult to do this. And also like if you're able to do it successfully, I think the ultimate goal that you're getting at is like it's more pleasurable if you're able to kind of like edge and get to the point of near release and back up and then do it again and like several times. And then eventually, yeah, probably get there, but like with more buildup, right?
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of dovetails into, in couples therapy. I do talk a lot about, like sort of bringing some space into that sexual experience and trying to expand what the idea of sex is itself. Because most people, when you say sex, they're like, oh, you know, well, if it's a straight couple, it's intercourse and both people are going to have an orgasm. And, some other version in a queer relationship. But, you know, it's like the idea of pleasure itself, and can we just sort of expand that, extend that? Does it, like, can we just, like, honestly, it is like going for a walk and not deciding where you're going. you know
Mm-hmm.
and I sort of talk about that in the article, this idea about, like, how do we just be in the present moment
Mm-hmm.
and be in the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
because, like, that's a beautiful space to be in, right?
Yeah, and it's challenging. So
Hmm.
we all have anxiety around sex. And so when we're saying these things and you notice like that anxiety rising, that's perfectly normal, perfectly natural to feel like some uneasiness around letting go of that destination. And so accepting that the anxiety is there and like welcoming that part into, I mean, even talking about that with your partner
Yeah,
seems like it could be really liberating. Like, oh yeah, we both feel this anxiety around um sex going a certain way and finishing a certain way, and like and our somehow our worth gets like attached to that, or like certain narratives about ourselves get attached to like sex going a specific way. If that can come into the space between you two, it is something that you can like work through and probably like get past a bit.
and like what happens in the relationship with yourself or with another person, entering into that space of inquiry, into, talk, expanding your talk about this, like, that's really the great thing, right? So it's not what actually happens, but it's like the space that you're creating to talk about, yeah, possibility, being curious, et cetera, et cetera. So if anybody's listening and is still listening to this point, honestly, I would love any sort of like comments or questions. I mean, I really am very curious to hear what other people say about what comes up for them, even in the idea of this, right?
Yeah, the other aspect that just came up as you're talking is like it doesn't have to be with a partner edging. And gosh, so I'm in sex therapy training right now, and our instructor this past weekend talked about masturbation being like a date with yourself, and how so many people just masturbate in like 5 minutes and like they have this very specific script. But
Yeah.
actually, can you do can you do like some preparation, like if as if you were going out on a date with somebody else, can you actually like do some preparation around, self-pleasure? And then he actually said, can you take 30 minutes to be with your body, not necessarily your genitals, but like just kind of like touching your body and exploring and giving yourself different forms of pleasure that aren't having to do with like erections or coming or whatever, like the sort of traditional sexuality. And honestly, like it was hard for me to think about. It was hard for me to think about going into that space with no goal and like becoming more familiar with my own body in that way. Like it brought up a lot for me. So I'm just
Yeah.
like, normalizing that like these things are not like just easy. I think sometimes therapy talk makes it sound like it's just like, oh, we just need to release the destination and then it's going to be great. But like these things are hard.
Yeah, they are hard. Don't you think that that's kind of a little bit getting into sort of the divine feminine energy also?
Hmm.
It's like it's less goal oriented and more just about receiving and pleasure and just kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, and that's and moving from, it's like we're always very goal oriented so often in our masculine selves, and kind of making that shift actually is a big deal. But I do love that idea of, or just even the wording, having a date with yourself, I think is really beautiful because I do think that you can't do things with yourself. How can you like truly do that with somebody else, right?
Yeah, I mean there is a difference. It's like it is more thrilling to be touched by somebody else, but like yeah, how are they, is someone else touching you like building on something you've already started to build for yourself?
Yeah.
Or is it, yeah, or is there not that foundation? And yeah, it has me curious. I mean, I just honestly haven't talked about that particular subject much.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll talk more about it later.
Yeah, more to come. I'm in the thick of sex therapy training right now, so